My name is David Rodriguez, and we got a fun topic today. One of my favorite topics is Tomato Basics 101. So, hopefully, everybody grows the most popular vegetable. Maybe this fall, and for sure next spring, maybe we'll grow a few more. And maybe today's webinar will help you become a little bit better in growing tomatoes in your backyard garden. So I'm the extension horticulturalist with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service in Bexar County and San Antonio. So I know we have a lot of local people in and around the San Antonio and the seven satellite counties, as well as throughout the state. So the information that we're going to give you can apply anywhere in the state because they're best practices. So the extension service started here in Texas in 1914. So we have over 100 plus years of experience, and we're part of the land grant university, the educational arm supporting the 254 counties of our great state of Texas, but are funded separately from the land grant university, Texas A&M in College Station. So one of the big things about extension horticulture locally in and around Bexar County, San Antonio, and our research station west of here for the district in Uvalde is we do a lot of vegetable trials locally in the urban center, supporting farmers in the seven satellite counties as well as throughout the state. So that's the always has been the traditional bloodline of having cooperators of doing plant trials, be it vegetable, ornamental, or other in extension horticulture. Watermelons are the biggest. We're the biggest grower in the state of Texas of watermelons. So we do a lot of watermelon trials, co-crops such as broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, and of course tomatoes. The Belgiums, west, southeast of Bexar County, San Antonio. The Belgians, the largest ethnic population in the U.S., settled here many, many years ago. Thus, we were part of the winter garden back then. So we've done trials with the Verstuyft family for many, many years. You can see a picture here many years ago of cabbage, broccoli, a cauliflower. We've done some at the urban farm at the San Antonio Food Bank and other places locally, and working with our Bexar County master gardeners who support us often with these trials. So, since our topic is tomatoes, every year since the Sam Cotner years back in the mid late 60s, and really with Dr. Jerry Parsons and Dr. Stein, have done tomato trials. San Antonio has always been the hub of the state of new plant selections, not only ornamentals via the Texas Superstar plant program, but also the tomato, Rodeo Tomato, and others. So this is a planting supported with some of our volunteers um, at the at the Verstuyft's farm. And when we plant these trials, we go for 30 plus varieties of about minimum of 100 plants each. And it's good to have these cooperators, the farmer, the Verstuyft family helping us with this, who are located in Von Ormy, Texas, as well as volunteers, predominantly the Bexar County Master Gardeners and some great volunteers from the Garden Volunteers of South Texas as well. So we're very grateful. And of course, this year's been very, very challenging with any of these trials because of all the COVID regulations, unfortunately, that we have in front of us. So every day is a different day. And when we grow these tomatoes, it seemed that out of that big rattlesnake that was torn up in three pieces. We do these trials, and these snakes are out there, by the way, folks. So we can help evaluate and get all the data locally, and then we share this information with other extension horticulturalists throughout the state, so we can come up with some of these plants for the market as well, locally and statewide. So we release a rodeo tomato every year. Our rodeo here in San Antonio is in February. So in order to help support the Junior Master Gardener program and get horticulture excitement to kick off the springtime, we always release this rodeo tomato. And doing these trials has always been a big part of releasing these new tomato selections as well. In support of the Texas Superstar program, the new brochure which came out, the 2020 brochure, last was updated in 2016. You can find more about Texas Superstar plants on the homepage of the Aggie Horticulture website. There's about 80 plants in the 2020 new brochure. You can print it out yourself or check with your county agent if they're able to get some hard copies for you or your master gardener groups as well, because of the challenge of the COVID in many of the counties. Most of these plants in the Texas Superstar program are ornamental blooming type plants, but we do have a few tomatoes and vegetables that are listed as Texas Superstars that really went above being a rodeo tomato and has been released. And we'll talk about a couple of those here when we talk about tomato selections here. So when is planting time? So we have a lot of Central South Texas folks join us today and around the state. So this is a pretty good guideline of when most tomatoes are planted. So most people start, if you're south of San Antonio, they get excited down in the valley. They can maybe plant as early as January or late February. Typically through about early May. Planting small fruited types, cherry types, no later than May 1st, but really right about March 15th to maybe April 1st, maybe April 15th is stretching it, would be the time when most people put out transplants of extension recommended varieties, typically around that time frame. The later we wait in the spring or fall planting, then we should be putting much larger type containers out there to have a better chance. And in the fall, people finish up, typically most people finish up their spring tomatoes and spring vegetable garden typically the month of June, 4th of July weekend. It's too hot. It's too hot in July and August, so we have two definite planting seasons of both spring and in the fall. And with spring and the fall, and with the spring and the fall, we transition by putting fresh plants and in the fall as early as 4th of July weekend. But typically this weekend, if you haven't put your fall tomatoes in the ground, we need to get them in the ground here pretty quick because the challenges that we have. So spring, we plant when there's a chance of having a late freeze, but we're planting so we can run this race before it gets super hot and disease, insects, and spider mites come in. And in the fall, the same varieties we plant in the fall are the same varieties that we plant in the spring. We're planting at the hottest time of the year. So we're running this race to grow it with the warm weather, set flowers and fruit before typically it cools down around mid-September and have potentially fruit come in before the first frost. So we have a lot of challenges, but timing is the key. Learn what part of the state that you're in and use these as guidelines so you can have a successful planting of not only tomatoes, but both your spring and fall vegetable garden. So the folks that plant early, like buy the rodeo tomato in February, often, we're not ready to plant till maybe late March, early April. So we tell folks both for spring early planting, so pot them up, put them in these gallon-sized containers. Maybe put a half directly in your garden and the other half pot them up. This includes both and then scatter the planting out in March and then scatter the planting off out in August. So pot them up for a minimum of 30 days. Get some good quality transplants. Get some clean, fresh gallon containers or larger, depending on the size hole you can dig. And use a premium peat-based potting mix, not a potting soil when you pot these transplants up. Cut that with 20% of a high-grade finished compost, manure-based compost ideally. And then remember, compost is a soil amendment, not a fertilizer. So these container ones that we pot up uh, for the later plantings, we want to lace that with copious amounts of a slow release container fertilizer mixed in that media, and then water soluble once a week with a good water soluble fertilizer as well. So here's early spring plantings. This is a picture of our children's vegetable garden program at the beautiful botanical garden, one of the oldest youth educational gardens program, Saturday morning gardening school, you might say, in the nation. So, we've done planted spring tomatoes as early as late February, early March. And the key is on all tomatoes is to make sure you use a large enough size tomato cage that's at least 4 to 5 feet tall with a 16 to 20-inch diameter and anchor hooks on the bottom of the cage to support. So in early spring plantings, so we can have neighborhood bragging rights. And when you plant early, you start out with hardy, good-looking plants, green and healthy plants that the nursery, both the grower and the retail independent nursery, has acclimated a little bit to the elements. But when you wrap these tomatoes, you're giving the plants with these insulate grow web winter protection blanket type wraps that are measured out to fit the size of these cages. 4 to 5 degrees of extra winter protection. But it's the wind that you have to worry about. Not necessarily the cold, but it's the wind. So this makes a super big difference. And in other crops, squash, zucchini, and other crops, people use this as well for an insect barrier. And Molly Keck will cover insects on tomatoes tomorrow. So hopefully you can attend that as well. So how about fall time? Well, we really haven't used this in the fall time, so maybe a few of y'all can experiment at using this not only for an insect barrier, but maybe for the sun, the intensity of the August sun. You know, try a few of these plants for covers for the fall to about mid-September, and then wrap, about 30 days after you plant, and then get back to us and see how this works, because we know it works for the spring plantings. So let's see how it does for the fall. So here's a nice cherry type tomato. Cherry type is not stretching for the sun. It's just a growth habit of this plant, and then you can see this is 3 weeks after it's been planted, doubled in size easily. Um, it's anchored on the bottom of the cage with 12 to 18-inch rebar that you bend as a shepherd hook at the rim connection so you don't bend the rim. And it helps to support the top heaviness of the cage when the plant is growing, as well as the well anchored down and attached insulate the grow web. So those hooks are very, very important. Don't be using those little rinky-dink 33-inch and 42-inch Hecho in Mexico tomato cages. They're not big enough for tomatoes. Use those on eggplant and pepper and sweet basil and things like that, but don't be using those little rinky-dink ones. You can find these quality cages at the texastomatocage.com website. Maybe get your group to order bulk to cut down on the cost and freight. or some of the nurseries carry these larger ones as well. So the tomatoes that we've always recommended and really promote predominantly are what we refer as determinate type tomatoes. So when we do these trials locally and statewide, that's the main tomatoes that we look at. So these are basically commercial varieties, predominantly heaviest grown in Florida, some in our Rio Grande Valley here in Texas, and throughout the world. So we gotta try these varieties and make sure we look at them ideally 3 up to 5 years. The recommendation of a spring tomato is the same as the fall tomato, and they perform the best. They grow about 4 feet tall. They grow as a big bush. They grow, they flower, they set fruit before the extreme summer heat. Remember when the temperature, typically around mid-June into July, both nighttime and daytime temperature gets very extreme. And once temperatures get above 90 degrees, the pollen becomes unviable, so you can't get fruit set. So that's why it's so hard to get fruit set and quality tomatoes in July and August of fruit. And then you have other pressure of insects like stink bug, disease potential, spider mites, and other. So we basically pull out the spring planting and then we plant fresh transplants for the fall. But we have to run this race before the first potential frost. So maybe covering these tomatoes will help not only the heat in the fall, but also that first potential frost with that insulating grow web too. These are all hybrid selections, okay? So they have the best of mom and dad and grandpa and great grandmother, et cetera, and have been selected over time for disease resistance, for quantity and quality yields. And most of them are fruit that are about 8 ounces in size. But a lot of the ones that we've selected the last 5 to 6 years have 1 pound quality fruit to them and beef slicers, and they don't crack like a lot of the old varieties in the past. So we're real happy with some of those, and we'll show you some slides of those here in a couple minutes. They have a good sugar to acid ratio, and of course they've been bred for disease resistance. But most importantly, many of them have heat tolerance for the fruit set potential as well. Remember, tomatoes are wind pollinated. So 90% of the fruit that's set are wind pollinated. You do not need pollinating insects to pollinate. Just occasionally when the flowers are opening early in the morning on your plants, just shake your cage every so often. Shake it real good early in the morning, and that will help increase the wind pollination of the fruit set on these plants. So we typically recommend determinate selections. This is what we want, the A+. Of course, we took a ton of leaves off this plants to take this picture, but we want you to have quantity and quality yields. You don't need a lot of plants, just like when you grow fruit trees. Just do a good job on the few that you're growing and grow them in a large cage, 4 to 5 feet tall, 16 to 20 inch diameter. That's anchored down, ideally on the bottom. And so there's no reason to get 15 to 30 pounds of high quality fruit off one of these extension recommended varieties if you do all things correctly. So we said we recommend determinate. So on this picture, to the right, we have a determinate variety that's about 4 feet tall, almost maximum size. And the one to the left is an indeterminate, which is over 6 feet and still growing. The reason we don't recommend often indeterminate varieties is they're old genetics, you might say. A lot of those are northern varieties that simply don't perform well in the heat here. They don't set fruit, so they're not heat tolerant typically, and they're not hybrid, often hybrid selection, so they're very prone to disease pressure and inconsistent. So basically, you get a big vine with very, very fruit on it. So if you want to grow a few indeterminates, that's fine. But really, the determinants are really the best ones to plant out there. So we know for fall planting of tomatoes, with the oven turning on mid-June through mid-September, we have challenges, but we want to grow tomatoes. And here are some principles that often when we do these vegetable talks, we cover because we unfortunately are getting emails and questions of people making the mistakes. But hopefully you can grow these beautiful tomatoes as we see on these beef slicer and others. So sun is the key. Be it the spring planting of your vegetable garden or tomatoes or the fall, you need sun. 8 to 10 hours of full intense sunlight is the key. So sourcing good quality transplants from your local independent nursery, hopefully their grower has hardened the plants off. We always buy local. We always buy Texas, of course, not out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, and other places like that. So we want plants that have been hardened off to the sun, because July and August is hot, hot, hot when we plant these transplants. So no, shade is for your convenience. Don't be growing them under shade trees and in the shade, because they're not going to perform as this person was planting their squash and tying their tomatoes around the fence and around this pecan tree. The root system of that tree in the shade is going to be a big, big issue. You need ample air circulation, so spacing between plants and the beds that you're growing in. Can you walk through there to spray, to weed, to harvest? Do you have ample air circulation and sunlight? And that's very important on all vegetables. And to the right of this picture, this image, you can see this tomato. It's stretching too much. That's called etiolation. It's stretching for that light. It's not getting enough. And determinants, remember, are big bush types. This is a determinant selection. It should be very full, very compact, but it's not receiving enough sun, not receiving enough air circulation. So that's very, very crucial that these plants have that. The other downfall, we see it again and again, unfortunately, with school gardens programs, community garden programs, and unfortunately, yes, you as home gardeners, is you have to have excellent weed management. Okay. As our trials, we start out clean, and God willing, we finish out clean. Remember, weeds are thieves, they're competition. They steal the nutrition when you fertilize, the water, they bring in pestilence of insect and disease potential. So you want to slow things down and do what you need to do. And there's a lot of options. Herbicide is typically the main option. These products are safe if we use them correctly. And I know everyone that's listening today always reads and follows label instruction. The products are not the issue. It's us not using them correctly. So don't get in the mess. Once you get Bermuda grass and other weeds in your area, you're going to lose this battle, and you're going to decline the quantity and quality of fruit that you're trying to grow on these tomatoes and other vegetables in your garden. Plant nutrition. We've said a couple times in every talk that we do on vegetable gardening that you're running a race. So you have to have ample nutrition from start to end to win this race. And the winning of the race is the A+ of the quantity and quality of fruit that you're harvesting off these plants. So ample nutrition and constant amending with organic material, both in your spring and your fall major plantings. So this is a traditional garden row, old-fashioned. Typically, you can have 3-foot beds and then the furrows. They really need to do a much better job on the left and right to control the weeds, at least mow them down. Don't never let a weed flower or set seeds, because one weed today will be thousand the next season. And of course, the shade issue in the background of this picture, as well as the root competition of the trees potentially going into these beds here for traditional row gardens. Raised beds, some of us in the hill country and other areas are on solid rock, or we're trying to do ADA beds, so we're not stooping down as much. And everybody has the opportunity to garden. So nutrition is very crucial, both in traditional beds as well as these above ground beds. So here's a good rule of thumb to run this race and to bring in the harvest. Every major planting incorporate a minimum, ideally about 2 inches of a very high grade finished manure-based compost. Remember, it is not fertilizer. And then you want to use 3 pounds of a 312 or a 412 analysis, such as the 1959 slow release nitrogen fertilizer. Okay, we use that per 100 square feet. Work that in, a minimum of 6 inches deep. And that's what we call bed preparation and incorporating of pre-plant granulated fertilizer into these traditional garden beds, vegetable beds, or raised beds that we're using. Remember, we have to do this every major spring and fall planting, particularly both the organic material, because it decomposes and breaks down with the heat of Texas that we have, and the ample nutrition to kick these plants into full gear. Remember, when we grow a plant, a vegetable, we're growing leaves, an abundance of healthy green leaves, photosynthesis, right, from the sunlight, and a healthy, vigorous green growing plant with no insect disease or spider mite pressure, fruit will come. So it's very, very important that we follow this guideline. Now, a lot of us do container garden. That's great. But remember, you only need one plant in a large size container that drains well. Okay, drainage holes on the bottom. You use those big cages on it, 20-inch diameter container ideally, and you follow the same guidelines as what we just talked about earlier on potting up these larger containers in gallon containers. So we use a premium peat-based pre-moistened potting mix, not a potting soil. We cut that with 20% finished manure-based compost, and then we lace that with copious amounts of a slow-release container fertilizer like Osmocote 18612, which is a 312 analysis, or something comparable. We do not want to use the 1959 slow-release fertilizer, the same one we use here locally in mid-April for our lawn, in these containers, because it's too strong of a fertilizer. So we want to use a time-release, slow-release container fertilizer, such as Osmocote 18612 or something comparable. We always read and follow label instructions. We might make an exception this time. Whatever it says per size diameter of container, double it and mix that into your medium, your media, and that compost mix as well, because you need, look how green. Now don't look at the fruit or that tomato cage or container. Look at those green, vibrant leaves. That's what you want. And we're fertilizing also weekly in these containers, once a week, every week, and have 3 water-soluble fertilizer that you alternate weekly as well. Efficient and adequate supplement irrigation. So the farmers that we work with, they've been doing this for 50 plus years, and they're very fortunate to have quantity as well as quality water from old springs, and they flood irrigate, but they're masters of this, and they know how to use the water and control it most efficiently. Remember, you never plant on dry soil, particularly fall planting, of course. You have to have ample moisture in the soil, and you never set out transplants unless they're hardened off and they're moist. And then you got to get the water on them as well. For most of us as home gardeners, particularly planting in July and August or as early as 4th of July, if you're not using drip irrigation, folks, you need to. It's a good way not only to use water efficiently and conserve water, it'll minimize weed pressure, but because you're only putting water where that root system, and then you're mudding the plants and you're putting that little transplant. The orifice on this system is every 12 inches apart. So this helps when you set out your transplants every 3 feet apart. And when you put your tomato cage, particularly if you make them with reinforced Remex reinforced wire or the ones that have spikes, please don't puncture that drip tape or the drip tube that you have out there. But drip irrigation's a must. If you're serious about vegetable gardening 12 months out of the year and conserve water and don't get the leaves wet, this is a must. High beds, good drainage, drip irrigation, good varieties planted at the right time of the year, and a drip irrigation system as well. Mulching will help. We like to mulch our vegetables and or tomatoes in early May. We take advantage of the warmer weather in late winter and spring, and then we mulch in early May. And then when you set out in 4th of July through now, tomatoes and other vegetables, transplants, mulch, mulch, mulch. Get that mulch out there. Thin layer about 2 inches. Never put excess soil or mulch up on the crown of the plant. My favorite for Central and South Texas for the regional type mulch is an organic native hardwood mulch, finely shredded, that has finished compost, manure-based, worked into it, and we call that a living mulch. A living mulch. This will help regulate that temperature. So we plant this weekend our tomatoes. We're putting some transplants out, both the gallon that we potted up 30 days ago, and maybe a few fresh ones as well. Never on a dry soil. We make sure the plants are wet as well as the soil we're planting in. Mulch will help hold the moisture and regulate that soil temperature. 106 heat index, but underneath that moist mulch in the soil profile, hey, guess what? It's 80 degrees. So it does make a big difference. And use those on the containers as well on the patio too. So mulch, there's different types of mulch depending where you're at and what part of the state, but it looks pretty, helps get that moisture where it needs to minimize evapotranspiration, and it helps reduce weed pressure as well. So we're not going to talk about too much disease issues in Molly Keck. Don't forget to visit with her tomorrow when she does her webinar on tomato pests. But disease issues, we need to improve our growing techniques, and we've mentioned quite a bit of that. Remove yellow leaves immediately. If we have a rain event soon after and we start seeing yellow leaves, we need to pull those off as soon as possible. Consider spraying prophylactically after a big rain event and early in the morning with a chlorothalonol fungicide containing Daconal, and always read and follow label instructions. Often when it comes to diseases on the plant, we wait too late. The plant's already yellowing and turning brown, and spraying a fungicide is only going to minimize that from spreading. So you might do a prophylactic approach, and we don't do that often on vegetables, but this really helps in early plantings of spring tomatoes. When you set out to minimize some disease pressure as well, try not to let the bottom leaves or any leaves touch the soil, okay? So pinch those off, water the plant in real well, use your water-soluble fertilizer. For regular raised beds and row planting, use water-soluble once a week for 3 weeks as well, till these plants really take off with that pre-plant granulated fertilizer. But pinch those leaves off that potentially touch the ground and mulch them, because a lot of these diseases that we get on tomatoes are soil borne. So if we minimize leaves touching the ground and we mulch as well, this will help relieve some of this disease potential on these plants. So we want you to get quantity and quality of yields, as my good friend growing just a handful of plants, Joe Lorenz, did this spring. We want you to have that same success with your fall crop as well by following the simple guidelines that we always have to keep talking about, because these are the simple mistakes, unfortunately, people make year in and year out. So plant extension recommended varieties at the right time. That's why we do this research, and work with your local nurseries. Make sure they carry these varieties at the right time, that they're independent nurseries or dealing with the grower and doing the right thing at the right time. So when we do these trials and plant 30 varieties, Celebrity is one of the two major control tomatoes we plant out there. Celebrity was the 1982 was a numbered variety, and it's the most popular 8-ounce medium-sized fruited tomato that is grown in the nation, folks. That says a lot. That says a lot. So it's proven the test of time. It came out because it was a newer hybrid. It had resistance to root knot nematodes, and it has and still has quantity and quality yields on these plants. Tycoon was one of the first beef slicers that we've ever put on the market. Made it as a rodeo tomato here in San Antonio, and it was so good statewide as a beef slicer of 1 pound quality fruit with minimal cracking on it that we designated to be a Texas superstar plant as well. That says everything right there. And that's the second control that we use on these trials statewide, because if you can find a tomato that is as good as a Celebrity or a Tycoon, you're doing good. Also look for tomatoes that we release every year as a Rodeo Tomato, and you can read up more on Rodeo Tomatoes on plantanswers.com. But Bobcat has done well, and things with hot names to it. Sunbrite, excellent. Remember, like poinsettias being the Christmas flower, they're red. Tomatoes are red as well. 99% of poinsettias are red. 99% of tomatoes are red as well. And keep an eye on this. We have a question mark by it, folks. Y'all might be some of the first to hear this. Valley Cat has really proven the test of time. It's proven itself statewide and in the Rio Grande Valley as a commercial tomato. Excellent tomato over the years. So I think next year in 2021, we're really real close of promoting it as a Texas superstar tomato as well. So if you haven't not grown Valley Cat, start getting some plants and growing them as well. A lot of small fruited tomato. If you get kids involved in a good way for school gardens and community gardens and home gardens, to get the kids involved, because you don't have to grow a lot of these small fruited tomatoes because there's so many to harvest. So Ruby Crush is a teardrop type tomato, and we're real excited about this. So look for these cherry type, small fruited type tomatoes, and Ruby Crush is a winner. And then a Texas superstar one, which is called BHN 968. BHN 968, we refer to it as Dwarf Cherry Surprise Tomato. You never tell a person how good tasting a tomato is or how hot a pepper is, because taste is subjective. The wife might say this is the best tomato or pepper they've ever eaten, and the husband will tell you the complete opposite. But this is one of the rare tastes when we do these subjective taste tests, that everyone who has tasted this tomato says it's unbelievable taste to it. And you just judge the kids out there in the garden because they're eating half of them off the vine before they're even brought in. This is a true Texas superstar plant. And if you're not buying seed from Johnny Select Seed, or you're not familiar with Johnny Select Seed, you should be. You can buy this BHN 968 off of Johnny Select Seed. Yeah, you're going to pay 50 cents a seed for it. Yes, you are. But when you get 5 quarts of high quality, minimum of 5 quarts of hot clamshells of high quality marketable fruit that cost $5 or $6 at the produce section at the grocery store, don't worry about 50 cents for that seed or $3 or so for that transplant that you can buy at our local independent nurseries right now. So this is a winner, and get the kids involved with their own. And you only need 1 or 2 plants. That's how productive these winners are. So that's some about Tomato 101 basics. We mentioned often Aggie Horticulture. Hopefully you're using both that website and plantanswers.com website as well. A lot of great information. And plantanswers.com has a lot of great information. Dr. Jerry Parsons, plantanswers.com, both on the Rodeo Tomato and how to pot up some of these spring and fall tomatoes into gallon size as well. If you don't have or added Dr. Sam Cotner, who was in the Winter Garden here in the 60s until Dr. Jerry Parsons took over in 74. Often this is the best of the best. Dr. Sam Cotner, the Texas Vegetable Book, to add to your home library because it has so much great information in it. You can find that book on Texas Gardening Magazine, and other good vegetable and gardening books as well. So thank you today. There's our Bexar County Extension Service link to our website. A lot of great information from my colleagues archived there on our Bexar County site, as well as the homepage of ongoing webinars that we're offering. And if you missed something today or other tapings we've done, please subscribe and share with others. Spread the word for us, please. Free seminars that we've been doing, please, on the My Extension 210, one word, My Extension 210, capital M, capital E, YouTube channel, and subscribe to it and get the word out for us as well. So Molly Keck, our great entomologist tomorrow, she does such a wonderful job. We'll be doing the second part of Tomato Basics 101 and covering tomato insect problems at the same time tomorrow, 12 noon to 1 p.m., free webinar. And then mark your calendar also on our Zoom platform, Tuesday, August 25th. We'll be going more in depth of straight to the point of a few more warm weather crops, very briefly on tomatoes, since we covered it today, and then going right into September, October plantings of transplants and root crops and leafy greens of cool weather considerations for your family vegetable garden. Always like to do a bonus plant before we answer questions today. And August, no later than early September, is an ideal time to plant large blooming cut flower pollinating, attracting butterfly zinnias. The best series out there is Dreamland. This is a winner, a Texas Superstar plant, of course. You can plant zinnias a couple times in the spring and early summer, but if you've never planted them in late August or early September as transplants, Dreamland, without a doubt, is one of the best. You can find the small lilliput type like Profusion and Sahara. Those bloom very beautiful as well. But if you want to bring pollinators and butterflies this fall and a wonderful cut flower, don't forget to add this Texas Superstar for your August, early September transplants planting into your in your vegetable garden, or for sure in and around your landscape. So David Rodriguez here. That is my email address. So if you have any gardening or landscape related questions, please do send me an email. And when we archive on My Extension 210 YouTube channel of today and tomorrow's presentation, give us at least a week because we have to do a few little edits here and there. Ruby Zavala does a great job editing that, and then Denise Bettis, our horticulture support secretary, does a wonderful job getting the word out in all these webinars. So that's it for today. I hope you learned a little bit. We're going to answer some chat questions right now. Please stay to the end so maybe you can get your question answered to save an email there and everybody can learn together. Who's going to do the chat today, Ruby or Denise, to help me out?
It'll be me, David. It's Ruby.
Ruby Zavala, Youth Gardens Coordinator, the best in the state. Thank you, Ruby.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So the first question comes from Jean in Sugarland. Would like to know how to control spider mites organically.
How to spider mites organically? Well, there's no, for home gardeners, both traditional and organically, there's really no pesticides that are on the market. Now, you can consider the health of the plant. That's the key. If you get spider mites early on your spring or fall planting, 9 out of 10 times it's something we're not doing right. Ample air circulation, good enough sunlight, and kick up the nutrition. Remember, a good healthy plant with vibrant green foliage will minimize that spider mite, which is not an insect, from doing that feeding and that damage. So water, nutrition, sunlight, air circulation. Louisiana State University has done a lot of work. So if you want on spider mite with the use of cool water seaweed extract. So if you want to spray that on a weekly basis to kind of harden off the cell wall of that leaf of that plant, that we've gotten good results on that. But the key is you have to spray this early in the morning, once a week, when it's cool in the morning, and the challenge is getting it underneath the leaves of the plant. Seaweed, cool water, liquid seaweed will not kill spider mites. So that's a misnomer, a lot of misinformation out there. But look at doing that and see how that works.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question is from Diane Johnson. We want to know, what are some good ways to support tomato bushes? The cages are too small.
I don't believe that. If you're growing bush determinate types and you're following our recommendations of the right varieties at the right time, tomato cages that are 4 to 5 feet tall, 16 to 20 inch diameters, that have the shepherd hook support on the bottom rim of the cage. If you're having problems, you're using a small cage of Hecho in Mexico, 33 or 42 inches, that should be used on basil, eggplant, or simply put, you're growing indeterminate varieties that in today's talk we really don't recommend for all the reasons we talked about.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from Susan. She says that the 4th of July through August 15th seems like a dormant period for tomatoes. They just sit there. August 15th seems more reasonable nowadays. And she wants to know, is that correct? Is that a correct way of thinking about that?
I don't really understand her question, but to review it, the spring vegetable garden, particularly with tomatoes, typically ends around mid-June by the 4th of July, because July and August is too hot. So all your spring planting, you pull out the ugly. You don't want to inoculate your garden with disease, insects, stink bug, and spider mites. So pull out the ugly. If it's really infested with any of those, dispose of it. Spider mites don't compost well. Get rid of it. Get rid of it early. Okay. And then 4th of July weekend to about now to early September, we start putting fresh transplants out, as we mentioned in today's webinar. Now, if your plant, as your pole beans and your peppers and your eggplant and often small fruited tomatoes look nice, and have made it through July and August, and don't fool yourself. You really have to make that question look nice. This weekend would be a good time to trim out the center of these plants, no more than about a third. Remember, pruning is a dwarfing and rejuvenation process in order to flush it out with new growth to set new fruit, flowers, and fruit going in the fall. But we've always have proven that fresh transplants done correctly, as mentioned in this webinar, and some of y'all have to go back to the webinar taping that will be posted in a week, will always outperform carryovers from the spring.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question's from Cindy. What kind of wrap did you say you were using on the cages?
The early planting and consideration for the summer heat is called insulate or grow web, and goes by different names. The best buy is if you buy it by the running foot, or you can buy it prepackaged, which tends to cost a little bit more money. So we do this for early plantings in spring, as early as late February or March. Makes an excellent insect barrier, but it lets the UV light through there, gives the plant extra cool weather protection. But it's the wind and an excellent insect barrier for other vegetables as well. So some of y'all might try a couple of these this fall, as well as see how it would perform for the heat. If you're worried about the heat, let's see how this works. So try it on a few of your fall tomatoes as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question comes from Roger. What should I do to reduce tomato cracking after heavy rains?
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with the variety of tomato. So you need to always look at the extension recommended varieties. And everything that we talked about has to be a part of this. Spacing of the plant, air circulation, sunlight, mulching, using drip irrigation. So if they're cracking, it's often the variety. The plants, if you mulch them, will help regulate soil temperature as well as moisture content. So a lot of that has to do with it. If it cracks, either make chow chow or green relish out of them and pull those off immediately, because as soon as they crack, and they're not vine ripened, which we really don't recommend too often vine ripening your plants because of the mockingbirds and other creatures that come to them, then you learn from that, move on, and try that, see if that would work.
Okay, our next question comes from Cindy. Can you please recommend organic fertilizers? And when you say frequent addition of organic material, what exactly do you mean?
Just like we said on this slide, every major spring and every major fall planting, not only tomatoes, but vegetables in general, you incorporate with the native soil a minimum of 2 inches of a finely aged manure-based compost. And remember, compost is not fertilizer. You're fooling yourself. So if you want to use an organic, natural-based, uh, organic, and that's usually an alfalfa-based granule or poultry base, since the nutrition is so low, the analysis like a 423 or something like that, that's fine. But instead of using 3 pounds, as we recommend the slow release 1959 locally and statewide for 40 years, which is a 412 analysis. And that's what plants are made up of: 4 parts nitrogen, 1 part phosphorus, and 2 parts potassium. So you would use 8 to 12 pounds. 8 to 12 pounds. You have to use almost 4 times as much because of the ratio per 100 square feet.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Chris Lopez from San Antonio. He was asking, where can we get properly aged manure-based compost? He said that he already planted, but just for future use.
When you go into your local independent nursery, they will sell premium bags of compost, and look at what a generic bag of cow manure costs compared to a premium bag of compost. There is a difference. They should have some out on display or cut the bag open. There is a difference. Or good quality places around the state that sell bulk material should have it. The key is make sure it's a manure-based compost and not biosolids.
Okay, our next question comes from Ellen. Uh, any recommendations for El Paso? My Beefmaster or beefsteak come out like cherry tomatoes.
Uh, if you're buying those, you need to go buy them somewhere else because they're tagging them wrong. They're tagging them wrong. Somehow, either the nursery gets so busy that they're buying from a poor grower. So they shouldn't be like that. If they're small fruits, that's probably they're mislabeled. The second thing is you're not fertilizing enough. Remember what did we say about running the race and the slide we just showed? And beef slicer is an indeterminate type. Try Tycoon. You're going to have a heck of a lot better success and less cracking. Tycoon, Bobcat, Sunbrite, Valley Cat, but Valley Cat and Tycoon for sure.
Okay, your next question comes from Cindy. Should trusses be removed after all the tomatoes are ripe?
Repeat the question, please.
Should trusses be removed after all the tomatoes are ripe on the plant?
You can leave the trellis in place. You want to get rid of the green debris as best as possible and as quick as possible. Shred it down, incorporate it, or cover it in your well balanced compost pile. You don't want to keep that foliage out there too long because of insect disease, spider mite potential, and you don't want to inoculate your garden with that mess. And remember, the green part of that plant towards the end is going to really benefit a well balanced compost pile once you cover it with your organic material. So always cover the green part from the garden into your compost pile so it can benefit when it burns it down and blends it in a well balanced compost pile. The other thing, folks, and I know how you guys are, you can do it. You can do it. You got 2 or 3 tomatoes left on your plants, 10 pounds of stink bug, 5 pounds of spider mites, but you're waiting for those 3 tomatoes. Pull that stuff out early. We make the problems with insect disease and spider mites, and Mike-Kek's going to elaborate on this more tomorrow. But get this inoculant potential out early so we're not having these issues, please.
Okay, our next question comes from Joe Villalobos. This last spring, I planted good quality tomato transplants from local reputable nurseries. Used raised beds, fertilizer, mulched as recommended, covered cages, but was still infested by hookworms. He wants to try again, but any other suggestions to avoid this failure?
Okay, what does he mean by hookworms? Is he talking about nematodes, Ruby?
He says he had a hookworm infestation.
Okay, so I'm presuming he's talking about hookworms, nematodes, and the roots. The female penetrates the developing root, and that's why it doesn't matter if it's organic or synthetic fertilizer. Is an element taken in through microbiology, temperature through the same way. The plant doesn't know the difference, folks. So the female root knot nematode attaches herself to the young root that's taken in water and nutrition, and then the males engulf her, and it clogs it up as we see these nodules on the root. So if you have root knot nematodes in the soil, you might start practicing by family of plants of not planting the same type of plant in the same area for at least a year or two. And Dr. Sam Cotner's book will help you with the family of plants. That's why I love this book, all the great information. And then building up the organic material in the soil is going to help decline the root knot nematode because there's no product that you can use in the soil. Buying quality plants and then following all the steps that we talked about. I didn't hear him talk about nutrition, and I didn't hear him talk about air circulation and sunlight. That will definitely help as well. And then you're going to have to plant marigolds in that area, particularly the small blooming marigolds. Lots of them when it's warm, and then when it's cool, you want to plant a cereal rye in late October, early November as a green manure trap crop to help build the soil, but also to trap these root knot nematodes. So there are some options. We have much more information on the control root knot nematodes on plantanswers.com. Just go to the information index for those articles. If it's a worm or a caterpillar, Molly Keck will cover all that tomorrow as well.
Yes, thank you, David. I was just about to say that if you guys have any other insect-related questions, Molly Keck will be covering that topic tomorrow. And so, Joe, if you had another question on that, or that wasn't what you were talking about, Molly might be able to help you out with that tomorrow to identify what that insect was. The next question comes from Beth Crowley. How do I clean container material types between harvests?
Okay, a 10-to-1 chlorine, a 10-to-1 Clorox bleach solution. You know what the number one chemical, and it's not organic, folks. With this COVID, what is the number one chemical we use all the time in this country? Is chlorine. It cleans, but use a 10-to-1 ratio, maybe a big tub of that. Wipe it down, wash it down first, and then dunk it in the tub. And if it's just wear and tear on the containers, simply replace them. And then, of course, use good quality potting mix, not potting soil. 80% peat base, cut with 20% finish, high grade, finish, high grade compost.
Okay, the next question comes from Robin. Why does the fruit fall off my Juliet tomato? You just touch it and they fall off.
If the fruit falls off, you're probably vine ripening them too much. If that's the case, we usually say on tomatoes, so if you have problems with birds and squirrels and two-legged critters and stuff like that, then as soon as they blush, physiologically speaking, that fruit is not going to size up anymore. So if you harvest that fruit with the cap or calyx attached to it, wipe it down, let it green inside from ripen up inside. That's the key, okay? That might be the issue. Watering too inconsistent, letting it dry down too much or too much water can cause that as well. And if you've never grown this 968 tomato, compare it against Juliet and let's see who's going to be the champ at the end.
Okay, the next question comes from Glenn. He said he has the spring tomatoes still in the ground. They're Celebrity and Red Snapper. This year's Rodeo Tomato. He wants to try leaving them in for a fall crop. Any recommendations for cutting them back, fertilizing, watering, anything like that?
Yeah, everything we talked about already today. This would be the weekend to trim the center out no more than 1/3. Follow the guidelines of what we talked about in nutrition. Since you already have them planted, you just simply side dress them every 2 weeks with the 1959. When you side dress with the 1959, You never put a granulated fertilizer up on the crown of the plant. You always put it on the outskirts of the plant, scratch it in and thoroughly water it in, and seal that bag immediately. So do that maybe 3 tablespoons per plant every 2 weeks, or a half a cup initially, but scratch it and water it in, close that bag real quick. But remember, your plants have to be nice and clean. No insects, disease, spider mites, or other. Plant a few new plants, please, because new plants will always outperform carryovers, and you're pruning them back. You're pruning them back to encourage new growth, and new growth will have blooms and fruit. So do a comparison, but do plant a few new plants as well.
Okay, the next question comes from Paola from San Antonio. What would be a good variety of tomatoes that have a shape where it looks like they have wedges? Something that aren't completely round, and maybe something like an heirloom tomato?
Okay, so the plum type or saladette tomatoes that do real good is anything that has Roma in it. So those are saladette or plum-like tomatoes. And those are the best of the best for, I think personally, for salads and making salsa without a doubt. So that's what you typically see shipped out of Florida, Mexico, and California and our valley to the produce section 12 months out of the year at your HEB or whatever. So if you want to try those, anything that has aroma. The only indeterminate type tomato that you might consider, well, you can try all of them. The choice is yours. We still live in a free country, folks. But if you want to try one, then the one that I think does pretty good is early girl. But again, they become big indeterminates or big monsters, and they're not reliable. That's why we do these trials, for reliability, consistency. That's the problem with these indeterminates. They're not reliable. They're not consistent. You don't have quantity or quality yields, and they're often northern varieties. That's extension horticulture doing the legwork for y'all folks. So if you want to try early girl, and then when we do these tomato contests, normally when it comes to the biggest tomatoes for the heaviest in these tomato contests, normally it's like purple Cherokee and a few that are 1.5 pounds plus. But then you talk to a lot of these people, and how many tomatoes did you have off that one plant? One, maybe three or so. So the choice is yours. See what performs best for you.
Okay, the next question comes from Susan. Just a little clarification from the question she asked earlier. What she meant to say was that planting in July 4th seems too early for her to plant the tomatoes, especially with the heat. So she's wondering, is there any recommendations or anything that you have for planting now in summertime for fresh transplants to beat the heat?
Definitely. What we've talked about already, Susan. You got to plant for sure on drip, without a doubt, drip. You never plant on dry soil. You put quality plants that have hardened off, extension varieties. What did we talk? We talked about mulching is very important. And what do we say too? Just like we do at the rodeo, right? If you're not ready to direct plant because you're worried about the cold or the heat, what do? We pot them up. So 4th of July, you probably, or the month of July or even early August, pot them up 30 days or so. And let's put these big plants out now, no later than the first part of September. And all that information is on plantanswers.com under the Rodeo Tomatoes and how to do that.
Okay, the next question comes from Cindy in Austin. She wants to plant a cover crop, and she wants to know, can she do it right now? Could she use a bag of black-eyed peas from the grocery store as seeds?
I wouldn't, because it's normally the wrong variety. Call Douglas King Seed Company locally, or a local feed store, a good seed supplier in and around your area, and get some southern peas, purple hull peas, cow peas, all one and the same. That makes an excellent cover crop, a green manure crop, an edible crop, loves the heat and helps build the soil. You can harvest the young green beans; they taste excellent. Or the versatility of these is you can shell them, and unbelievable when you shell them, or you can let them dry and use them later as a dry pea. So they're very versatile. But the key here for this organic material is towards the end is shredding them and working them into the soil, roots and all. That's where you're going to find the benefit of these plants, these types of cover crops. And that's why we call it a cash crop. The southern pea, black-eyed pea, cow pea, etc., or a green manure crop. When it gets cool, they're not going to grow as much. So late October, November, if you still want to do a cover crop then, or another type, you would do a cereal rye like an Elbon ryegrass, or a winter vetch would be a good one as well. Douglas King Seed Company is a good source to purchase some of these seeds from too.
Okay, the next question comes from Rita. When she eats tomatoes, she saves the seeds for planting. Are these seeds good for planting?
Well, it depends. Okay. We talked about determinate and hybrid varieties. Okay. So if the plant germinates, it's a hybrid. So it's not going to be the same as mother plant. So it might be worse. It might be the same. I doubt if it's better. Uh, so that's one disadvantage of those versus an all open pollinated one. Tomatoes are the most grown vegetable plant, and that's why we spend so much time in extension horticulture on these trials and these plantings. So we do the legwork for all you guys. So if you want to try it and experiment with that, but still put some fresh transplants out, as we talked about numerous times in today's webinar, and see what comes out best for you.
Okay, guys, looks like we're over time. It's already 1:08. We're going to go ahead and finish up right here, guys. And so if we didn't get to your question today, you can always contact David later on. There's his email address right there on the screen with any other questions or pictures or things that you might want to share.
Thank you, Ruby. Thank you, everyone. And get the kids involved. Remember, we got to share this skill and this art with the children. 3%, don't forget. 2% is the American farmer that feeds us and the world. And 1% defends our liberties. So we got to learn the skill of gardening. And most important, get the kids involved. Happy gardening, everyone. And remember, learn and have fun.